Now is for the question of why the pendulum that is located on the equator compared to the other ones like 30 degree, 40, 60 to 90 pole degree, it stays not virtually nor essentially, but actually stays for its pendulum that swings from left to right. But the areas other than equator, it goes to the other direction, having an angle on its period. Trajectory is changing from parallel linear to the vertical circular manner. The pendulum is not only shaking from one side to the other in its parallel one-way linear direction, but also the Earth rotates as it follows the circular trajectory for its rotation. So the trajectory follows not only having a linear, but also it does so by having a circular motion, meaning compounded, superposed trajectory is made on top of each other, linear and circular, happening, and also other is happening upon which. So linear and circular, it's a very fantastic, more complex motion. And circle around 360 degrees as Earth rotates, but in the equator, and since the what we call Coriolis effect, for the movement of an object that flies on the territory of Earth, it has a momentum for going a certain direction, following a certain direction other than that its originally intended projectile trajectory, because it stands on top of the Earth, and Earth rotates, and it is affected by the Earth's rotation for its direction to follow. Reason of why, even though it is not attached on the ground and in the air freely, it follows the rotation's direction of Earth, is because the air moves almost simultaneously as the ground rotates, because the gravity and friction holds the air tight. So when the ground moves, so does the air. Even though ground is fixed and air can circulate from the solar winds effect for its circulation, but in general, from the effect of gravity and friction of an atmosphere to the ground, it almost attaches, and we have to study on that. So when the airplane flies through the air from one country to the another, and having longer the distance, the greater the effect of the Coriolis effect, since when the plane moves from one to the other as a constant direction, it moves while the Earth rotates. So the longer the distance, the longer the flying time, the longer the effect of Coriolis effect. So when its flying direction matches with that of the Earth, it goes more faster because, Earth provides you a support for moving you to the and the other way around, the opposite direction, it goes more harder and more longer, more harder or longer, even having we show a good example when from Earth, the ground, to the atmosphere, going a projectile like a rocket, when going upward, it not only goes vertically, but also as the Earth rotates, and so does the air around the Earth is affected by the rotation. The direction of aircraft is affected by the rotation, having a curvature. It is just a simple combination from vertical force by the propulsion going upward, and the parallel force having a 90-degree vertical degree angle towards that vertical, meaning the parallel 0 degree, it is compounded, which is a Earth's rotation. So the 0 degree, a direction goes for the 0 degree, a direction goes for the upper vertical degree. It is compounded, meaning you are generally like to have an average in 45 degrees of direction, compounded, added in average. Earth's rotation goes toward the 0 degree, and the spacecraft's direction, its propulsion goes vertically, and compounded 0 to 90. It goes vertically and goes either right or left as Earth's rotation guides you. So it has to adjust its course by shifting the engine towards more vertically. Okay, not literally vertically, but like 80-degree or 110-degree as to real vertical to make, because the Earth rotates. And from the low pressure of the air, high pressure of the air, depending on its temperature, meaning the density, meaning the pressure of the air, find its way to make an equilibrium. When there is a minus, find for plus, and vice versa. It makes a circulation of the wind. Primarily because Earth rotates, sun makes a partial sunlight. When the California is shining, South Korea is dark, and the vice versa. That difference of temperature, the pressure, the density, whatever, it's the same on this perspective. It circulates to make an equilibrium. Circulation of atmosphere around the world happens right by that. And when the rain, typhoon, any other buoys are rising, we go is the uplift or uplift or the updraft and downdraft from top to bottom or bottom to top, and that is also affected by when its magnitude goes up, and even longer, the longer the time and distance matters for its movement of any other movements on the Earth, as it is having a exact same logic as our planes, projectiles, spacecrafts does, and so does the winds, updraft, downdraft of the atmosphere. When it goes bottom to top, it goes in northern hemisphere, it goes uplift vertically, and the Earth rotates on the parallel 90-degree side. So it like rotates as its distance goes much larger, and the period of time in which it is just circulating for longer duration, it goes circular form. Because, and one and only, if it goes vertically, but also while at the same time Earth rotates, meaning it goes vertically and it's longer the distance, having a longer period of its movement, it slightly goes towards the Earth's rotation's direction, like a compromise for its original projectile, for what for that direction was intended to be, but it goes following the Earth's rotation. So it makes a circulation, because Earth circulates, Earth rotates. Okay, it is not about the revolution that goes around the sun, but Earth's self-rotation. For self is 24-hour period, one by one, day by day. It rotates itself in 24-hour period, so it goes either left to right to left, doesn't matter. When the vertical movement happens, it is compromised by the rotation that simultaneously happens. And because, like America to Australia, going north to southern hemisphere, but the people that are standing on the territory is not just having an exact same copy on top of the California to the Australia, but just a symmetry. The terrain, the ground of California and the ground of Australia, it just penetrates each other. The foot of American is having a direct facet on the foot of Australian. Okay, so the atmosphere goes outer surface and the territory goes in inner surface, meaning it is just symmetrical, having a not accurate scientific words that the toilet flushes when the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere, its direction is different. Well, it actually is, but having a toilet, not like a diameter of 10 centimeter toilet, it is not visualizable. But having 100 kilometer, 1,000 kilometer of diameter of toilet, it happens, and it is just an opposite direction. It's not true. Opposite direction. It is what it seems to be in real person's perspective, who really sees on that standing point. It really is just the same, either left or right. It is constant because Earth rotates in one particular way. And the reason of why the opposite direction happens from north to southern hemisphere, it is just a essentially same thing but having a different perspective. When you do see in northern, it seems to be opposite in southern, and southern to northern, vice fucking versa, and it is just a symmetry. Okay, when the air making a updraft or downdraft, it goes from northern hemisphere down to top. Okay, but in southern hemisphere, it also goes down to top, but the territory is also remaining the same position to the other side, the northern hemisphere. So while it really goes same with bottom to top from the northern person's perspective, it goes the opposite direction, top to bottom. But no, it's just essentially the same thing. When you do experience in your own foot, boots on the ground, it really exactly the same. It is just a matter of 3D sphere, not just a hemisphere, but full sphere, a sphere, okay? Not hemisphere, but full sphere. And as to the matter of pendulum that goes in equator, and since the what we call Coriolis effect for the Earth's rotation's particular direction makes the movement on the Earth towards that projectile, not only it goes for its intended trajectory, but it also is affected by the Earth's rotation's direction. So it goes in the equator where it goes by the speed of 1,600 kilometers per hour. But since the Coriolis effect is made by the Earth's rotation, and when that pendulum is on the equator, it just pendulates, it just oscillates, it just moves around the same. It is attached underground, and the rotation happens as the circular same direction. But when it is laid in northern, like London or Paris or even Greenland or California, it rotates because Earth rotates for that northern hemisphere, that even though the distance that it has to cover is just shortened from like Africa or Mexico to the California to the like Vancouver, okay, to the Greenland, but its rotation for 24-hour cycle remains the same, meaning having same 24-hour rotation cycle, but it gets shorter and shorter as it goes to the extreme side, towards the pole. It rotates fast, okay? It rotates fast. From the equator, it has to cover the maximum circumference of Earth, meaning it goes 1,600 kilometers per hour, but in northern 1,000, 800, 6, 400, 200, and 0 to the pole. So it goes just the circumference is the maximized on the equator, and the shortest and goes to 0 in the northern or southernmost pole. So the pendulum goes the fast, like having a 360 degree, but per day, meaning 24 hour, as per 1 hour it rotates around 15 degree, not only for its linear for back and forth direction, but it also has a left to right, okay, compounded force by the effect of our Earth's rotation. So, but the equator, even though it is the fastest, but it has the longest, okay? It is the fastest in 1,600 kilometers per hour, but it has the longest, meaning even though it has the longest circumference to cover, it is by the fastest. And going towards the north, shorter distance, but shorter distance, meaning shorter, smaller circumference, but having a same 24-hour rotation period as the night and day. First 24 hour from the first initiation to the final first one period of its rotation is remaining the same for 24 hour, either it be located in equator or north pole. It goes 24 hour the same. The going north, going shorter the circumference to cover, but having an exact same period, meaning it goes faster. Okay, on the equator, as I've just said, it neither virtually nor essentially, but actually makes no other force towards the other axis of movement other than its linear first original direction, because and since the Coriolis effect is exactly the reason for making that, and it lies on top of that exact same line. So Coriolis effect, and when the pendulum is attached on the ground, it just on the outermost, the the point on which there has the longest circumference to cover. Okay, so it lies on that point where it has the longest distance, and it goes just a rotation, moving left right left right left right, LR 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 LR, just LR 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 dot 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 dot. Earth rotates at its maximum speed, but at its maximum circumference by the same period of 24-hour cycle of rotation. Left right, but it goes north, it has to go faster. Okay, it has to go faster on the smaller circumference to cover, but remaining the same rotation cycle, meaning longer the distance, but given time is the same, has to cover the longer. No. Shorter distance. And given the same period of 24-hour cycle. Time same. Distance short. When the pendulum is laid on both Texas and Iceland, having lower altitude to the higher altitude, and given at some point, like after 2 hours of initiation, for its trajectory, for how much it has moved, for the lower the latitude, the higher the ellipticity, because Uh, it, the pendulum that is laid in Texas, lower altitude, it goes swinging, but it goes much slower at the same given time compared to the which is laid in Iceland, higher altitude, not altitude, higher latitude. It goes swinging for longer distance towards the Earth's rotation direction, meaning the longer distance at any given moment, it draws more line onto the trajectory, being less elliptical, meaning closer to the circle. It goes much faster at any given time when it is laid on the north side, going the extreme side. Because the pendulum that is laid in lower altitude, it has a lot distance, meaning a lot of circumference of the sphere. It is not about the circle for 2D but 3D for a sphere, meaning at any given section of a sphere, the circumference for its full diameter to the 0 point on its extreme point, it goes expanding, shrinking the circumference of sphere, having a lower altitude, meaning the longer distance to cover at the same time, it goes more smaller angle. But in the northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, it goes more extreme side, meaning while at given the same time, it has a shorter distance to cover. Okay, shorter distance, the more conspicuous for its movement. Not only it is just inconspicuous, but it actually, by the logic, is because it has the smaller circumference, smaller distance to cover. Smaller distance. The trajectory of a pendulum that goes in extreme side makes more circular movement on its total direction. When the circle is made for its complete full cycle on either and any position of Earth, it just remains the same. But when it is not completing the full one cycle, meaning dissecting given bisection of any section of its circumference, the lower the latitude, the more elliptical trajectory it has. The higher the latitude, the more closer to the circle for its trajectory that it has. The pendulum that lays on the closer to the equator side, meaning the longer distance to cover at the same time with 24-hour rotation period, it changes its trajectory following the Earth's rotation, more smaller angle, but at the same time, when that is laid upon the extreme side, having shorter distance, shorter circumference to cover at the same time, it goes much faster, more wider angle, more conspicuous to see the rotation. Just imagine a pendulum is lying, and when it is lying on the equator and the middle ground and the north for 3 different points, how will it act? Okay, while at the same time it goes back and forth for the pendulum's original movement, but it is affected by the Earth's rotation. How will it go? Do not draw by a pencil on the paper, but imagine your head, no pencil, no drawing. The longer circumference to cover as it goes down to the equator, the shorter, the smaller angle it has at any given moment of its circulation. The northern, the southern, meaning the more extreme side of the sphere it goes, it lays on that region, it has much smaller circumference of sphere to cover at any given point, so it goes much faster, more having a wider angle. and when it lies on the extreme side, literally on top of the Greenland, southern pole or northern pole, where it literally is just a tipping point 0, its angle goes maximum for having 360. All circumference goes by 24 hour, meaning per 1 hour it goes 15 degree to change. The lower the latitude, the longer the time to complete the one full circle, like Texas for 36 hours, Africa for the longer hours. So just easily imagine when the pendulum is located on the equator side, having the longest circumference to cover. It starts from one side and having dingle, 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 left, right, LR, LR, LR for its entire circumference to cover, followed by the Earth's rotation. Since it is laid upon the Earth's surface, the surface rotates at 1600 kilometers per hour, and it goes for 24 hours circumference, okay, per 1600 goes constantly, dingle, 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 dingle. You are lying on the surface of Earth. On the surface of Earth, having an equator and having a certain point of a surface of Earth start for dingle, 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 go, 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 go. 24 hour. Dingle, 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 dingle. And you imagine when the pendulum, you are lying in the 30 degree, 40 degree middle ground of a northern hemisphere. You're also having dingle, 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 dingle. Oh yeah, dingle, dingle. But you have a shorter circumference to cover by the pendulum going back and forth direction, but it really goes having a circular trajectory. Not only is it linear, but also it goes circular from one point to the other, having a circumference like 3D. Going at one point, let's say 40 degree, you say dingle, 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 and goes having a circumference to cover. It is the same for 24 hour, meaning the lower the speed for compared to the equator that has the maximum. But the speed doesn't really make any difference on its Coriolis effect, what we want to know, discover into. So the point is, it has smaller circumference to cover, and it has a circular trajectory. Circular trajectory, dingle, 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 dingle. But smaller circumference, its variation goes much, having a slightly more angle, like when you are having a pendulum in 10 degree of northern hemisphere, but 20 degree, but even 30 degree, it has shorter and shorter and more shorter circumference of Earth to cover, but the same 24 hour, it goes more conspicuous for its circular motion. Let's say having a 40,000 circumference to cover, and you go, which is equator, a very long time to wait. But when you are in like a Canada, in like an Iceland, it has much shorter, smaller circumference to cover at the same period, which means it completes its one circle more conspicuously, more having a more steep angle. Same time, but shorter distance. Longer, wider the angle to cover for its circular trajectory on its orbit, on its way for any given moment compared to the wider equatorial closer one. Dingle, dingle, dingle. Let's say 60 degree, okay? 60 degree, dingle, dingle, but having shorter circumference to cover, dingle, 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 dingle. Shorter circumference, it has more wider angle as it goes up. 70 degree, same dingle, 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 but shorter circumference to cover. Okay, dingle, but yeah, it goes having more larger, wider angle. Like, let's say you are just responsible for having 5,000 circumference to cover compared to the maximum, which is 40,000, having 8 times lower the circumference, smaller, shorter the circumference to cover. It goes 8 times more wider the angle when it comes to these 360 degree of circulation. 8 times shorter, 8 times more wider. Okay, 8 times shorter the distance circumference of Earth to cover, 8 times wider the angle, as that are both given the same 360 degree circular motion, one full cycle to cover. More shorter circumference of Earth, more shorter, going to north extreme, either south extreme, more shorter circumference to cover, but at the same 24 cycle period. More shorter. Having more wider angle. It is not about the speed. It is about the circulation and the distance of circulation. The distance of circulation wider, this distance of circulation longer and shorter, so does the angle of the circulation, like a pizza, for how much portion of pizza is moving in on this circulation full cycle. At any given time piece section, the closer to equator, the longer the circumference to cover, the shorter the angle of the circle. Okay, that is just an imagination. You imagine having 40,000, having 30,000, having 20,000, 10,000, 5,000, 1,000. It goes much smaller, like 2 times, 4 times, 6 to 8 times much shorter circumference of Earth to cover, while at the same time it goes much smaller, shorter this circumference to cover, much wider the angle, because it both all of are completing the 360 degree of circulation. Okay, so in summary, going the equatorial, the maximum circumference to have more like 10, 20, 30, 40, 60, 70, 80 towards the extreme 90 degree of latitude. Going more higher latitude, the shorter the circumference on that given point of circumference of the sphere to cover, having exact 24-hour period, okay, of circulation, but having shorter circumference as it goes towards more extreme. What had been once required for, like, let's say 30,000 circumference, 30,000 kilometer, let's say it in 1 hour it varied for its angle like 3 degree, okay, 30,000 3 degree, but in 20,000 it goes like 4 to 5 degree, but in 10,000 4 times shorter. Would it be 4 times larger the angle? We have to go more deeper. But in average, for its relation from distance to the angle, it is just opposite ratio, like a fraction, okay, fraction. So the longer the distance, the longer the circumference to cover, meaning the angle for its movement at any given time piece goes more narrower, okay, narrower, that's the right point, narrower, right word, narrower. And it goes much extreme point, meaning going smaller, ever smaller circumference of Earth to cover, while at the same period, it goes more steep, wide angle. For easy number, like what once was 20,000 kilometer to cover at 5 degree per hour, but in 5,000, which is 4 times shorter the circumference to cover, but at the same time to cover the exact 360 degree, it goes much wider angle at the same time frame, hour to hour, like 4 times like a 20 degree, not a 20 degree, okay. shorter the circumference, but having the same time frame, the larger, okay, the larger the pie, the larger the portion, the wider the angle it gets. No fucking stellar. Gravity is the primordial, the first force for the universe, and it made a lot of reactions for forming stars and planets. Why the forms as the surface of those are having a circle and 3D sphere form. It's just having a equilibrium of those forces going, same forces going into all other directions, making a circle, 3D making a sphere, just having an equilibrium of force. As to why planet Earth cannot but Sun can do is, for a nuclear fusion, is lying on the force of gravity. Bigger mass, bigger gravity, bigger force inward by the pressure forced by the gravity, meaning the atoms that consist the system, the planet, the star, for what can be close enough to make a nuclear fusion. So having a nuclear fusion, its driver is not the helium or the other hydrogen or other one. Its force, the original force for making that very nuclear fusion or fission possible is the pressure, the force that draws those atoms inward and having a contact, not having a distance farther, but having a contact by the pressure which is made by the gravity. The gravity makes the fusion possible by the inflection of pressure. Not their atoms for individual respective force. The gravity collects them. And then it makes a fusion possible. Stellar evolution. Stars are born from giant molecular clouds which contain diffuse particles of matter. When a cloud collides with another or with another galactic material, gravity causes it to collapse into a star. It combines, it congregates, and convenes. Young stars remain unstable for billions of years until they become hot enough to generate nuclear reactions that prevent from collapsing by the gravity. So, it is just a not funny, just a mild and no interesting of interaction of forces having a cloud. What fucking matter, fucking any other matters are in existence, just like a, let's say, random, but those interactions are made, and when they are in adjacent, combined, and just close near and having a giant ball, they are hard, they are heavy, they are having a heavy weight, and those near adjacent ones are drawn down to that same core. Eventually they are making a sphere shape because that has a equilibrium of force, for combining those with a zero volatility from any other directions to the another zero volatility, because the zero volatility making it stable to maintain its form, which is a sphere, because the sphere has zero volatility from one direction to the another on its entire surface area of sphere of shape. Okay, so what once was a vagrant, a vagabond, another ravaging barren world, and just having a random interaction and going closer and closer up. Someone is having more weight by the combining collision from one to another compared to the other stellar boys. You're having a more weight. They're going in, mingling, mixing, and having more gravity by the more added weight, meaning the core of it, meaning the innermost area of that entire sphere or any form of matter, is having the most pressure, most gravity, because it is the most innermost core, innermost center of its shape, having the hardest, heaviest load on its entire shape because it is in the innermost. This is why we call its center as a core of gravity, because it has the most power. And when the threshold comes in where the pressure given by the gravity is so high and the atoms that are consisting that some gases and dusts are even more colliding in close contact, like kissing each other, close contact. And even the fusion, literally fusion, one to the another, having go more and more fusion possible. The fusion makes an explosion from this changing of its energy state to the another by having a certain procedure which was made possible by the force of gravity going pressure down to deep and having a close contact in each other. In an explosion, that explosion makes outward force, and the gravity goes inward force. When the nuclear fusion, is made possible first by the given force of gravity, the nuclear fusion reacts to the outward, and the gravity inward, fusion outward, inward, outward. That equilibrium makes it the spherical shape possible. And they enter a mature stage in which the fusion of hydrogen into helium causes nuclear fusion to stop because of the lack of its resource to, literally, like a burning fuel, burning their resource from a massive amount of hydrogens into helium and more heavier boys. Gravity then collapses inward because literally there is no resource to make a fusion, which makes all those forces by that process going outward having a equilibrium from the gravity. But literally gravity acts the same, even though the masses are going down because the resources are going down, but from having converting first energy state to the another, mass is going down, gravity also going down, but the resources are draining much faster. Why? Resources are draining much faster. Resources are drained by the nuclear fusion, and so is the gravity. And why the gravity goes much larger than the draining pace of the hydrogen. The gravity goes down because the resource for making that fusion is draining, lacking the power. Well, it is not, by what I've just said, it is not working like that. Gravity is in diminishing, by the diminishing amount of resource for what they have a fusion by burning their literally fuels and combining and emitting their energy into the light, heat. But even though the gravity is diminishing down as its weight goes down, but when it comes to this level, this stage where the resources, literally the resources to make a fusion is nearly impossible because there's a drainage, relatively, not unconditionally, relatively the gravity stays much higher, because even though the gravity for its force is diminishing, but compared to what the opposite force maker, for their resources for making that very outward force is diminishing, while gravity slows down as the nuclear fusion's resources going more diminishing and smallizing, diminishing, uh, diminutively going smaller down for its shape, meaning for its mass. But when the level comes in that the items for making that fusion, which makes the outward direction impossible because of the lack of resource, the gravity is having more pendulated force relatively for its entire force, for its equilibrium, even though gravity is slowing down, gravity is smaller down, but lighter down compared to those other opponent. For their state is just literally lacking the resources to burn out and make it outward. So literally the gravity is not going its size unconditionally, but relatively compared to their literal lack of resource, gravity acts much more for their entire portion of interaction. The interactions forces of interactions, the gravity takes much larger portion for their interaction because of the lack of resource to make it outward. So going diminishing, and gravity pulls inward because there is no burst that goes outward, no fusion, but they're literally lacking resource, but not in zero resource, okay? Not in zero resource, because it is just a battle from gravity to fusion. When the resource for making a fusion is diminishing, gravity takes much more, comparatively, relatively larger portion for its entire forces of interaction, and gravity comes much in. But even though the fusion is making, okay, fusion is constantly making, but its force is just unbearable, uncomparative to the gravity. Resources draining, so the amount of outbursts that can be made simultaneously compared to the gravity is also diminishing. Gravity also diminishing by the diminished weight because of the drainage of resource. But gravity, okay, but the resource is literally going diminishing. Outburst is just not strong enough to pull the gravity, so it goes more diminishing down, and gravity takes much larger, okay? Gravity takes much larger portion of its entire forces interaction. And as I've said, it is not just a complete interaction, but it is just the process by which the gravity just takes much and larger portion as the resources for making the nuclear fusion is draining. Gravity takes much more larger portion that as the draining of resources. Fusion is not possible, but the fusion is always made, but it's much more shallower, smaller, diminishing rate. And the gravity comes much and more stronger, okay? Much and more stronger. And gravity makes the extreme of it. When the portion of gravity takes much larger portion of the entire forces of interaction from the fusion and gravity, going much squeezing, literally squeezing the atoms into more closer and making another burst, burning their last fuel by the gravity, closing the atoms in each other again by the force of gravity. Literally, gravity makes all, okay? Gravity makes the very fusion possible. So, in summary, when the star is newborn, the portion of a nuclear fusion for going outward is like a 50-50 to the gravity as to make an equilibrium. And the 50-50 is diminishing down, resources down, so the relative proportion of gravity going up, but unconditionally those forces are going down because gravity is diminishing because of the lack of resource, more diminishing mass, more diminishing gravity. But gravity takes much larger portion of its entire action, slowly diminishing the hydrogen, slowly diminishing the resources to make fusion to go outward as to make equilibrium towards the gravity. Gravity takes much larger portion, and the resources are draining smaller, and gravity push much harder because it's just a relative. Gravity is not going any much faster and harder because the mass of star is going just diminishing. So does the gravity, but the relative resource for making that outward is like going down much faster. So the gravity, even though unconditionally those forces are just going down, the relative portion to the fusion is going faster to the gravity, going much inward, and even gravity pulling the forces inward and draining all those last forces, last atoms to make a nuclear fusion again and make a last burst. So the phenomenon is what is called supernova. It's just a last burst. Gravity takes much larger portion, and the last remaining atoms are just forced down to the core. Last remaining atoms that lack the resource, that lack the amount of resource to go outward. So the gravity pulls inward comparatively faster, more harder, more having a weight. And that tiny resources are just having close to each other by the force of gravity, and the gravity goes faster. So does the compression, the pressing goes much faster. Okay, so the supernova is made by the fast acceleration of the gravity's forcing portion to the extra to the fusion that goes outward. So the literally supernova is just a last moment of the star, okay, for draining their last resources, last atoms to close each other, made by the accelerating force of gravity. So from the star, newborn star is actually made by the force of gravity because it collects by the force of gravity, and the nuclear fusion starts, and it drains the portion of gravity on its entire star, goes much larger comparatively, larger as it gets older, the gravity's portion of its entire interaction goes much larger, and at some point the star is hard to make enough forces to go outward, okay, to withstand the inner forces of gravity. Okay, it is harder, draining resources, and its portion, the outward portion made by the nuclear fusion, because the lack of resource, it diminishes down, and comparatively gravity gets more pie, even more pizzas, okay, from the fusion, takes more pizzas, more portions, and the resources are going much smaller, and gravity going much faster, and the atoms are they have no option but to surrender from the gravity, and more atoms going inward, and I'm having a last moment of bursting spark for their last remaining drainage of any remaining resources to go in simultaneously because of the gravity. The supernova is made by the accelerating pace of gravity's portion of the entire forces interaction of the star. Gravity makes the birth of the star and the mature of the star for its entire procedure of star, and the last remaining supernova of the star. Okay, Gravity is the real maker. Gravity is the real maker. Gravity is the real maker. So even though the forming of newborn star and to having a mature and having a draining resources and the portion of gravity much going larger compared to the draining resources of fusion and going much larger and going to have a supernova and just going, it's just a fucking meaningless cycle, okay? There one exists the primal force, number one, gravity, number two, having a nuclear fusion which goes outward, and those two basic forces are interacting less like almost eternally unless the universe is closing its business. All okay, all interactions are made by the simple force gravity and fusion, okay? Electromagnetic and atoms. So the process for a newborn birth of the star into the demise of the star is just a meaningless interaction from gravity to the another. Gravity makes all its job, makes all its show. The antimatter stage in which the fusion of hydrogen to helium causes nuclear fusion to stop, gravity then collapses the star inward, raising its temperature so high that it expands rapidly, becoming a red giant for another few million years. It's because the resource for their atomic nuclear fusion is not completely drained, reason why the expansion can happen even though the gravity pulls in, and simultaneously because gravity pulls in, the remaining resources for fusion can go expand. Its draining rate is much faster than it was from a birth to mature, going to the real last moment. Its burning rate, fusion rate, much faster because the gravity pulls inward much higher. When the newborn star is, the fusion goes make an equilibrium to the gravity, the resources going down, gravity's portion comes in much higher, so the fusion's rate is much faster, okay? Gravity comes in much higher. The nuclear fusion is having no choice but to what? Be compelled, pressed by the gravity, and coming much more closer compared to what it was, because the gravity acts more, having more proportion meaning relatively gravity is acting much higher force compared to the fusion force. The fusion is really compelled, okay, impelled from the gravity for taking much more closer rate, meaning much faster. So when there's a newborn star is there, the portion of gravity for its entire procedure to death is the lowest, and as it goes burning, gravity's portion goes more, and resources, while simultaneously draining down, gravity pushes more, so does the rate of fusion goes much more accelerated, faster, as gravity pulls inward, facilitates, accelerates the fusion much higher, much denser, meaning much faster. So the nuclear fusion acts much faster as gravity goes more. So when the gravity's portion of its entire procedure of star is the lowest from the birth to the end, going the highest, lowest to the highest, gravity's portion goes much more, so does the rate, pace, velocity, speed of nuclear fusion goes up because gravity makes it like an compelling, like an obligation to follow the gravity and go as it leads, as it forces downward, inward to the core and denser, more closer together, forcing fusion each other much faster as gravity's portion going more, and meaning fusion much faster, burning more faster, burning faster as it olds, gravity going much more proportion as it old, meaning burning much faster as it old. The last moment that the, the star cannot hold for its gravity and going much more denser, leaping, penetrating the threshold that the fusion can withhold, burning, collapsing down by the force of gravity and going much more closer and instantaneously more denser, and the fusion reacts like simultaneously. For much of the last remaining resources are burnt, fusioned out simultaneously. Extreme gravity, extreme fusion. Extreme gravity, extreme fusion. Simultaneously burning at the same time out, called supernova. Supernova, last remaining resources, are simultaneously fired out, fusioned out by the extremely increasing portion of gravity. Gravity from the lowest portion to the extreme portion. For the extreme, the star that has the extreme portion of gravity for its entire procedure is what? Black hole. Black hole, having the gravity as the highest part and the most extreme part of its entire forces interaction. Gravity acts like a 90%, 99% of the black hole, but in a newborn star is like a 50%, going much more portion, more pulling inward for the atoms to close together, making a fusion. Gravity takes more portion relatively, going more and more. The fusion is made much faster because gravity pulls relatively more compared to the outward forces that the fusion can make because of lack of the resource. Gravity takes much more pies, more pizzas of the forces interaction, facilitating, compelling the last remaining resources of atoms to go close much faster. Lowest portion of gravity, highest portion of gravity, birth to death. As the star goes from birth to death, so does the gravity's portion from the lowest to the highest, and simultaneously also the fusion for its pace, for its rate of burning from the lowest to highest, lowest to the newborn star, highest to the supernova. And for what is having the extreme portion of gravity is called black hole. A star that has an extreme proportion for its entire force interaction governed by the most virtually all things by the gravity is called black hole. Black hole. So the all new forming, congregating, colliding, making a newborn star and having a major procedures and dying and supernova and white dwarfs and other kind of stars by its masses, going bigger cheese balls, going black hole. It's just another kind of simulations for interactions. But number one, it is made all by the force of gravity, from congregating to maturing to bursting to another star. Congregating, making newborn star, and going down major resources, draining down supernova, turning to another kind of face of its procedure, another star, governed by solely, entirely dedicated on by the gravity, and the fusion is followed by the gravity. The fusion cannot be made until the pressure, either the pressure or heat, is inflicted upon, and the heat, gravity having no heat, but a pressure makes heat. So the gravity is the first initiator for its entire interactions of universe. Second, the fusion. Okay, and that basic elements of force make a lot of simulations, a lot of explanations, a lot of examples of all the stars and planets that are out there in the universe. Yes, so it says, raising its temperature so high that it expands rapidly because there is a last remaining resource to make that supernova, to make that giant expand possible, which is drawn by the force of gravity. All things are made by the gravity. The expansion, the massive expansion made by the nuclear fusion is possible because nuclear fusion is made possible, which is made by the force of gravity, making a lot of pressure, closing the atoms together, burning their last fuels by the nuclear fucking fusion, by the fucking pressure given by the close to each other by the gravity, becoming a red giant for another few million years. When all their nuclear fuel is burned out, which makes at that point of stage no fusion is possible. The supernova, another giant, a giant red giant, is possible because there is a force, a nuclear resource is remaining for making that expansion possible to make that form. But when literally all their nuclear fuel is burned out, last remaining resources are literally drawn out, and gravity is the one and only force to make that shape define. Smaller stars become white dwarfs, which eventually cool to black dwarfs. It cools because there is no heat generator. Larger stars, similar to that, explode as supernovas, becoming neutron stars. If a star is bigger than that, collapses into a black hole whose matter is so dense that gravity prevents any life from escaping. The gravity's portion is going much bigger as the density, as the mass of star is going much larger. The mass of a star defines for which form of star later the face would be. Gravity is the first initiator for all the forces interaction, and that ensued interaction by the first action of gravity makes the another interaction by the nuclear fusion, and that nuclear fusion for the compounded interaction makes another type of stars by the criteria of its mass. Okay, however complex of the system would be comprised as seemingly, but analyzed deep down, making a logic, rather smaller forces by rather smaller ones is governing. So any other structures, okay, seemingly more complex, and it can make more complex by what? The complexity. If the essence of a structure is the complexity in itself and is not made by the simpler logics, well, it can, but by that very reason, it cannot be divided because the complexity of structure is the essence. The essence of it is just the complexity. It cannot be divided, but almost other structures can be divided into the smaller units, breaking down apart for its basic elements to analyze, and from that logic, making another combination and making another structures to make a complexity, starting from the basic elements combination, compounding in combination, or making another applications derived from the core simpler, smaller logics. Yeah, the advancement of knowledge is made possible from understanding the basic forces and making another applications from those applications, and for its purpose is to make diverse structures. Okay, the utilization, maximization.